On today's episode, I'll get into a breakdown of Sam Rinzel and Oliver Moore's NHL debuts, while also getting into an updated look at the Tankathon Standings.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Blackhawks fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Real quick, just a reminder to go and hit that like button for me. Hop in the comment section down below as well. Mailbag Monday obviously is going down today. Won't be able to answer those questions on today's show, but I'll make sure to bookmark them and answer them this time next week. And real quick, just want to say thank you so much to everyone who reached out with Mailbag Monday questions via the YouTube comment section, through email, or my social media channels. Racked up a great slew of questions for Mailbag Monday here today. Let's try to do that again next week, shall we? And last but certainly not least, go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube if you haven't done so already. Really going to start leaning into 2025 NHL draft coverage as the summer starts to approach. And I don't think anyone is going to be covering the NHL draft from a Blackhawks fan's perspective like yours truly. So just another reason to go and hit that subscribe button for me. Again, 100% free, will not cost you anything, and helps me out in a massive, massive way. But happy Monday. Thank you all again for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. Hope everyone out there had themselves an excellent weekend. I know I sure did, even though it was yet another loss for our Chicago Blackhawks. Actually now marks 10 in their final 11 games in the month of March following that awesome 3-0-1 start. Yeah, hasn't been very good for them ever since. But on the bright side, Sam Rinzel and Oliver Moore, 2 first-round picks for the Blackhawks in the last 3 NHL drafts. Both spent the last 2 years developing at the University of Minnesota, signed their entry-level contracts over the weekend. Go and check out the episode, the audio-only episode that I dropped on Sunday morning, talking about both of those guys signing their ELCs, what it means, and where I think they kind of pencil into the Chicago Blackhawks rebuild. But as expected, Rinzel and Moore both made their NHL debuts yesterday afternoon at the United Center as the Hawks took on the Utah Hockey Club. Love to see the two boys going no buckets for their rookie laps, as I think every Blackhawks youngster who stepped onto the scene these last 2 years has done as well. Also thought it was super cool to see a handful of now old Minnesota Golden Gopher teammates make the trek to the UC in support of Moore and Rinzel for their first NHL games. And as someone who has spent so much time talking about each of these kids ever since they've been drafted and how well they've played for the Golden Gophers, and again, how they can impact this Blackhawks rebuild, it just put such a big smile on my face to see both of these kids finally on the big league stage. Unfortunately, it did come in a 5-2 loss for the Blackhawks, but I think altogether, well, yes, it was another loss for the Blackhawks. I don't really want to break down exactly like what went wrong for them in this game, because it's really not anything too differently from their 10 losses in their last 11 games. And just as a heads up, Blackhawks fans, because of all the losses the Blackhawks went through to close out the month of March, they are now firmly in the mix in the Tankathon standings, along with the San Jose Sharks, for the best odds at the number 1 overall pick in the 2025 NHL draft. I'll be talking about that during segment 2 of today's show, so make sure to stick with me. But what I really wanted to break down from yesterday's game was Rinzel and Moore. Obviously, that's where I'm going to start. But I do think, again, even though it was yet another loss for the Blackhawks, just seeing all of these kids now on the scene together, as I mentioned in the episode that I dropped on Sunday, I believe that now makes 17 players on this Blackhawks roster at 25 years old or younger. You can just see the injection of youth and mostly speed now in this Blackhawks lineup. And remember, going into the start of this year, the Blackhawks were actually one of the oldest teams in the NHL. I really don't think that did their offense any favors, as in the first half, especially under Luke Richardson and that defensive-minded style coming from him being a defensive-minded defenseman throughout his NHL career. Like, the Blackhawks couldn't get anything going offensively whatsoever because of the lack of speed. But now, with all of these kids on the scene, and because Kyle Davidson has really wanted to inject speed into this lineup ever since taking over as the GM, he drafted a lot of kids who have good wheels, and now we're starting to see them on the big league stage. Yes, it's still resulting in losses, but I think it is more encouraging for our Blackhawks fans to watch. And I think it also is more exciting to watch out there because there's just more exciting plays that actually can happen because of all the speed going on in this lineup. And you just need to play with that speed to have success in the modern day NHL game. But starting with Sam Rinzel, the man who went 25th overall in the 2022 NHL draft, I thought he had a phenomenal NHL debut. Wound up playing 20 minutes and 15 seconds of time on ice, registered 4 shots on goal, and legitimately had 2 or 3 A-plus cracks at scoring his first NHL goal. One of them, he even looked up into the UC rafters because he wasn't sure how it didn't find the back of the net. But the overall aggressiveness that Sam Rinzel plays with in the offensive zone, and because of the foot speed that he possesses along with his great size, I mean, that combination right there in and alone of itself, a 6'4" right-handed defenseman who can skate the way Sam Rinzel skates, I mean, that is perfect, again, for the modern-day NHL game, how you want top 4 defensemen to play. And we saw that out of Sam Rinzel, being able to utilize his wheels to get to loose pucks, and also recognizing the play in front of him when he has some open ice to go and jump up a little bit into the offensive zone and follow up on some of those rebounds. It was awesome to see out of Sam Rinzel. I thought his transition game in terms of passing from the defensive zone to help his team go and spring offense in the other direction was pretty sharp for a kid in his first NHL game. And he just looked like someone who was really confident and comfortable with himself out there. So super excited to see what Sam Rinzel has to offer in these next 8 NHL games. And if he keeps playing like that, that first NHL goal isn't going to come too far in the, it is going to come sooner rather than later, I guess I should say. But not only have I been speaking highly about Sam Rinzel on this podcast for years, Blackhawks fans, calling him a top 4 defenseman, a guy who I believe can quarterback the power play. And again, for similar reasons to Wyatt Kaiser, but along with a 6'4" frame, the mobility of Sam Rinzel just fits so well with what you want a guy with the offensive skill set like Sam Rinzel. That's how you want him to play out there. So I'm super excited to see that, but to also hear Frank Saravalli, Blackhawks fans, during, I believe it was the second intermission on yesterday's game, just pump up the tires on Rinzel, maybe harder than anyone I've ever heard. That was definitely noteworthy. Here's what Frank Saravalli had to say about Rinzel. Quote, "This is a guy who's a dynamic player who can skate like the wind. And beyond that, the biggest strength that he has is he never seems to get rattled." And Saravalli also mentioned that he believes Rinzel will never play in an AHL game and will make the Blackhawks opening night roster out of camp next year. He believes this is a guy who is going to be a top pairing number 1 defenseman in this league. Like, I've been super high on Sam Rinzel. I always saw the ton of runway, even when he was only 17 years old and got drafted, right? That frame, and again, the way that he skates, super, super intriguing. But I've never called him a number 1 defenseman in this league. I do think he has that type of upside, and that's why he's always been so high in my Blackhawks prospect rankings. But to hear someone like Frank Saravalli, who knows prospects super, super well and is such a highly respected source, for him to give Sam Rinzel this type of praise, I mean, I think adds to the excitement that all of us Blackhawks fans have for Rinzel in the future. One thing I wanted to say on Rinzel, I do apologize, Blackhawks fans. It was Saturday. A lot was going down. I accidentally said Sam Rinzel wore number 5 with the Golden Gophers in college. Shame on me. He rocked number 2, but I still don't believe he's like fully committed to that number 6 sweater. So again, anyone who's thinking of buying a number 6 Sam Rinzel sweater, I'd be a little bit patient on that, kind of like Kevin Korchinski switching from number 55 to number 14 here this season. But Andrew Sorensen gave Rinzel a lot of praise after the game as well, saying, quote, "Just watch Rinzel. His mentality of attack off the blue line or just advancing pucks with his feet. Those are attributes that at this level are really positive. To see that for a first game, that was pretty impressive to watch. So just keep building off that. Both of those attributes, both of them referencing Rinzel and Moore that came in today, have them for sure. So love to hear that from Anders Sorensen. Love to hear that from Frank Saravalli. Oliver Moore definitely didn't have as noticeable of an NHL debut as Sam Rinzel did, but again, Rinzel played 20 minutes and 15 seconds, second most among all Blackhawks defensemen. Oliver Moore was utilized in a third line role along with Joe Veleno and Nick Foligno, but I thought it was a fine NHL debut for Oliver Moore, who, by the way, was playing the wing, not the center ice position, wound up tallying 2 shots on goal and was -1 in 15 minutes and 3 seconds of time on ice. But I do think that's a good spot for Oliver Moore in a comfortable defensive-minded setting to open up his NHL career, right? I talked about and have talked about for years about how I fully believe Moore's biggest impact to this Blackhawks team is going to come with his two-way ability, and perhaps even more so on the defensive side of things and on the penalty kill. He can just utilize his wheels, which he even has better wheels than Sam Rinzel does, which is saying something. Both of these kids can just absolutely fly. But I really believe Oliver Moore is going to have such a hands-on role in all the defensive success the Blackhawks have because of his speed, the range it gives him to impact plays in all 3 zones. So I like him playing with Joe Veleno and Nick Foligno to open up his NHL career, also learning from a very well-respected defensive-minded forward in Nick Foligno, who's been there, done that, been a good defensive-minded guy for a long, long time, even though he has had some lapses in the second half of the season with the Blackhawks. I'm sure he's pretty frustrated with the situation as well, which doesn't help with those deficiencies, but do think that's a good spot for Oliver Moore. Rinzel was definitely the more noticeable of those 2 players, but again, super excited that both of them are just on the scene, and to actually type their names into my Blackhawks lineup previews. It's like, I used to pray for times like this, Blackhawks fans. But there are my thoughts on Sam Rinzel and Oliver Moore. But just outside of those 2 guys, still some really noteworthy showings from a lot of the kids for the Blackhawks yesterday as well, despite the team losing 5-2. Connor Bedard, we saw him register a power play goal, a primary assist. I don't know how that got spewed out of my mouth. Primary assist on Ryan Donato's goal. Couple of saves made by Utah Hockey Club goaltender Karel Vejmelka to rob Connor Bedard there, but love to see Donato finish off the play and continue on with his hot streak. But for Bedard, that now gives him 6 points, 3 goals, and 3 assists over his past 7 games. Now has 58 points, 20 goals, and 38 assists in 74 games on the season. I referenced how much I would love to see him reach the 25 goal plateau. Time is kind of ticking here, needs 5 tucks in his final 8 games. I don't know if he's necessarily going to reach that, but still would love to see him tally 65 points or more before the season comes to a close and continue on with this nice stretch of play that he's found over the last couple of weeks. Love to see him with Ryan Donato and Ilya Mikheyev on the top line. Anders Sorensen, I'm going to be very angry if you change that again during these final 8 games. Artyom Levshunov, like Connor Bedard, also tallied a primary assist yesterday, a nice play in transition to jump up on the rush, and then the correct read to set up Joe Veleno on a 2-on-1. Veleno, his second goal as a member of the Blackhawks. But Levshunov continues to get the lion's share of ice time on the back end for the Blackhawks, led the team once again with 20 minutes and 52 seconds of time on ice. There are some issues in the defensive zone that he still needs to clean up a little bit, but all in all, for a kid in his first NHL stint at 19 years of age, yeah, he's looking pretty darn solid. And by the way, he did officially burn off the first year of his entry-level contract by playing in his 10th NHL game on Sunday against Utah. So he'll burn off the first year of his ELC. I talked recently about how I think that was the most likely plan of action for the Blackhawks. I think it does make sense getting him to that second contract sooner rather than later. Can potentially save themselves some money. There's not going to be as much of a sample size for Levshunov to kind of make his case to arbitrators or whatnot. And also he'll still be a year younger than he would had this of slid one more season. So I do believe it was the right decision by the Blackhawks, but something to note, Artie officially has the first year of his entry-level contract burned off. I think that also could give GMKD a little bit of an advantage. signing these kids sooner rather than later, just giving him a little bit more of a full perspective as to what the financial books are going to look like when this team hopefully starts to turn it around. But another solid game out of Artie on the back end last night. Got to give Ryan Donato his credit, though, Blackhawks fans. This guy is just on an absolute roll. His 29th goal of the season last night. Got to hit 30. Got to hit 30, Mr. Ryan Donato. What an unbelievable season he's put together. And by the way, he now leads the team with 59 points in 72 games on the season. One more point than Mr. Connor Bedard. How about this stat, though, Blackhawks fans? In the last 29 games, and by the way, these are 29 games in which the Blackhawks have been sellers. They got rid of, Peter Mrazek, Seth Jones, Taylor Hall. They've been sellers during most of this stretch. Ryan Donato's been held off the score sheet just 7 times in his last 29 games and has 35 points during that stretch, 16 goals and 19 assists. I mean, he has been unbelievable, and it's been awesome to see. Ryan Donato, such a great dude, such a hard worker, has been, he's starting to get his credit now because of this hot streak, but throughout the course of the season, he was still the most underappreciated member of this Blackhawks team. Gotta keep him along with number 98 on the top line when this guy is playing like this. And that's what makes me the most frustrated about all of this. Throughout those 29 games, Ryan Donato should have been playing with Connor Bedard because he was the most productive Blackhawks forward. At least he's playing with them now. Hopefully, both he and Bedard finish off the regular season on a high note here, Blackhawks fans. Frank Nazar, quick shout out to him, led the Blackhawks with 5 shots on goal. His speed was super noticeable throughout the game. Unfortunately, got stopped on a breakaway opportunity by Karel Vejmelka, which, funny enough, someone hopped in my comments on X and said that was a scheduled tweet because, of course, Frank Nazar would generate himself a breakaway opportunity. Hopefully, he'll find a way to start burying more of those moving forward. But just with the speed of Frank Nazar and Oliver Moore, like those kids are just going to generate so many breakaway opportunities for themselves. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch. Despite the Blackhawks losing for the 10th time in their last 11 games, still was pretty fun watching them and Sam Rinzel and Oliver Moore making their NHL debuts. The full kids display on the Blackhawks continues to blossom here at the end of the 2024-25 campaign. But speaking of the end of the 24-25 campaign, we're getting towards it. And because of all the losing the Blackhawks have been doing, they are firmly in the mix to land the number 1 overall pick in the 2025 NHL draft. I'll get into an updated look on the Tankathon standings here in just a moment, Blackhawks fans. Make sure to stick with me. First, though, I do got to talk to you all briefly about the fine folks over at FanDuel. March Madness is here. We're down to the Final Four, and FanDuel is now giving you a chance to get in on the action like never before, because right now, new FanDuel customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. It's 200 extra bucks that you can use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's going to be cutting down the nets in San Antonio this weekend. And with tournament games happening Saturday and Sunday, you know there's going to be something exciting to bet on. And again, new customers, you can get $200 worth of bonus bets by simply having your first $5 bet win. So what are you waiting for? Go and visit FanDuel.com right now to get in on the college hoops action when the Frozen Four goes down this weekend. Again, check out FanDuel.com right now. Segment 2, Blackhawks fans, because of all the losing this team went through to close out the month of March, we are now down to the final 8 games of the 24-25 regular season, and the Blackhawks are firmly in the mix in the Tankathon standings to land the best odds at getting the number 1 overall pick in this year's draft class, which, as I've talked about a couple of different times over the last month or two, I don't know necessarily if that's like as strange as that may sound, Blackhawks fans. That's necessarily the best thing to do, because I really believe it would be a tough decision for the Blackhawks between Matthew Schaefer, even though he is a high-level defenseman with tons of runway who's only 17 years old, because of their deep defensive prospect pool already, it would be very tough, I believe, for them to choose between Matthew Schaefer and Michael Misa. But because they've lost 10 of their last 11 games, that gap between them and the San Jose Sharks has absolutely narrowed. San Jose still holds the best odds to get the first overall pick in this year's draft, but they're only below the Blackhawks in the NHL standings, or I guess ahead of the Blackhawks in the Tankathon standings, by 2 points. The Sharks are now 20-44-9 on the season, giving them 49 points through 73 games. That's a .336 points percentage on the season, would give them a 25.5% chance of landing the first overall pick. But the Blackhawks, they're right there with their 21-44-9 record. That gives them 51 points in 74 games. So they have 2 more points than San Jose does, but they've played 1 more game. So definitely worth monitoring during these final 8 games for the Hawks, 9 games for the San Jose Sharks. Those 2 teams are neck and neck, but regardless, Blackhawks fans, the Hawks will finish in the bottom 3 of the NHL standings. I believe this now marks for the 3rd consecutive year, quite honestly might be 4th, but they have cemented themselves in a bottom 3 spot once again as the Nashville Predators in the 3 spot. They're 27-38-8 with 62 points in 73 games. They have 11 points more than the Blackhawks, so that's why it's firmly a 2-horse race here down the stretch. Nashville has a .425 points percentage. If they should wind up with those odds, they'll have an 11.5% chance of getting the first overall pick. But because the Seattle Kraken are in the 4th seed and they already have 68 points on the season, the Blackhawks only have 51. 8 more games, 51 plus 16 is 67. So they can't even reach the 68-point plateau to get out of this bottom 3. But it's going to be interesting to see who kind of finishes 4 through 7 here. It seems pretty likely that it's going to be San Jose or the Blackhawks at 1 and 2, then Nashville at number 3. 4 through 7 are very up for grabs. Seattle's in that 4 spot. The Philadelphia Flyers, who of course recently fired John Tortorella, and I'll be having a Blackhawks John Tortorella conversation here this week, but it's not going to be a very positive one if you're someone who's a fan of Torts. I don't think he's a fit whatsoever here in Chicago, but obviously their season has been a dumpster fire. They're now currently 5th in the best odds for the number 1 overall pick with a 30-36-9 record, giving them 69 points in 75 games, .460 points percentage on the season. But the Buffalo Sabres and the Boston Bruins are right there as well. Buffalo 31-36-6, 68 points in 73 games, giving them a .466 points percentage. And then Boston has a .466 points percentage as well. They're 30-35-9. It's crazy to see how their season has basically crumbled right in front of them. 69 points in 74 games. They have 1 more game played than Buffalo at this point in time. But it's going to be a fight to see who winds up creeping into the bottom 5 between Seattle, Philadelphia, Buffalo, and Boston. As far as the last 8 games of the year for the Blackhawks go, next up, they'll be taking on the Colorado Avalanche this Wednesday at the United Center. Then they'll be on the road to take on the Washington Capitals, so very tough next couple of games. Then they have a home-and-home against the Pittsburgh Penguins. I'll actually be in attendance at the United Center next Sunday against the Pens. They'll be on the road in Pittsburgh following that. Then they're at Boston, at home versus Winnipeg, and then at Montreal and at Ottawa in a back-to-back on the road to close out the season. So not a lot of easy games for the Blackhawks there down the stretch. Yes, they do have 2 against Pittsburgh and 1 against Boston. Outside of that, though, all the rest of these teams still have something to play for, and Montreal and Ottawa could certainly have something to play for in those final couple of games to close out the year as well. So Blackhawks, I think, are going to give the Sharks a good run for their money, considering how much losing they've been doing over these last couple of weeks, considering how many inexperienced kids are now on the roster and getting chances on a nightly basis. And because of the schedule coming up, it's going to be neck and neck between the Blackhawks and the Sharks down the stretch here, Blackhawks fans. But there is an updated look on the Tankathon standings. San Jose holds the number 1 spot by just 2 points. However, the Blackhawks do have 1 more game played than them at this point in time. Coming up in just a minute, Hawks fans, before I close out today's episode, still got to get into my weekly edition of Mailbag Monday. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. To everyone out there who made Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen, just wanted to say thank you very much. Really greatly appreciate that. For your second listen, make sure to go and check out the Locked On NHL podcast, bringing you the daily league-wide stories that matter with the coverage you love from Locked On. Find Locked On NHL right now on YouTube or wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. Segment 3, Mailbag Monday. As I mentioned right off the jump, a great slew of questions to close out today's episode. Let's try to rack up the same number of questions next week. Make sure to reach out in the YouTube comment section below, or you can also email lockedonblackhawks@gmail.com or hit me up on any one of my social media platforms. First question comes from Murray McCourt, who DM'd me, on X, asked, what do you think of Todd Nelson as potential head coach of the Hawks next year? I do think Todd Nelson is a very intriguing option. Obviously has done great things at the AHL level, most recently with the Hershey Bears, the minor league affiliate for the Washington Capitals. That has been even prior to Todd Nelson, that has been a juggernaut AHL organization for a long, long time. But Nelson does have a lot of experience at the AHL level, has been an assistant coach a couple of times in the NHL with the Atlanta Thrashers when they were a franchise, and I believe most recently with the Dallas Stars. I do think in terms of experience and being around winning hockey, Todd Nelson is a good option. I still do think the Blackhawks want someone with a little bit more NHL head coaching experience, and Todd Nelson has never done that outside of being an interim for the Edmonton Oilers, I believe, way back in 2014, 2015. Again, he's done lots of great things with the Hershey Bears and throughout his AHL career, and I don't think he's a bad option. Like, if the Blackhawks looked into him, I would be like, that makes sense. He's a valid candidate. Is he the number one candidate on my list? No. Would I be upset if they went with Todd Nelson? No, but I don't think he's like the optimal candidate, if that makes sense. But certainly someone that I am looking at, and you don't know necessarily what the full market is going to look like. So you got to keep that in perspective as well. I'm not saying no to Todd Nelson. He's just not my optimal number one guy on my list, but definitely is someone I think the Blackhawks should be kicking the tires on throughout the course of the summer. And definitely am more interested to hear, I don't want to say like rumors on Todd Nelson or some other maybe like Blackhawks beats perspectives on Todd Nelson and some of the things they're hearing as to whether or not he could be a potential candidate. Again, I don't want to rule him out or anything. It'll be interesting. The Blackhawks' next head coaching hire is just going to be so fascinating, and they got to be so sure that he's the right guy because it's time to take this gosh darn step. I don't know if Todd Nelson is necessarily that guy, but he fits the bill. I know that's kind of an indifferent answer, but that's kind of how I feel about Todd Nelson, a little bit indifferent. I'm intrigued, but again, he's not number one on my list. Next question comes from Matthew McGurgan, 9368 on YouTube, who asked, why wouldn't the Blackhawks wait until next season to sign Moore and Rinzel to get 3 years out of their ELCs instead of 2 years in these 10 meaningless games? Feels like the Blackhawks are wasting their first year on a cheap contract. Now, I actually forgot. I apologize, Matthew, for this. I meant to do this research before answering this question, but I guess I'll just do it out loud for all of us to, discuss together. Wouldn't Oliver Moore and Sam Rinzel only play 9 games this year and not 10? They're not going to reach that 10-game threshold, right? Or because they're playing games coming from college, does that automatically burn their first year? But Matthew, even as kind of the middle guy here, even if the Blackhawks are burning the first year off of Oliver Moore and Sam Rinzel, for the same reason as Artyom Levshunov, I don't think that's entirely the worst thing in the world. Yes, the Blackhawks are technically wasting a year, but getting these guys to their second contracts faster actually may be more beneficial for the organization because it could be saving them money, again, for the same reasons I outlined with Levshunov, because the odds of them ascending into stud players over the next 2 years compared to the next 3 is obviously less likely. And also because they're going to be younger, because they're not going to have as much experience. There's not as big of a sample size for their stats to really weigh in their favor, right? So I do believe, and again, because it gives Kyle Davidson, I think, a little bit better of an idea of what the future is going to look like in terms of the financials, I do think overall it is beneficial for the Blackhawks to get most of these guys right here, right now, to their bridge deals sooner rather than later. But again, I don't know if Moore and Rinzel are burning off the first years of their ELCs because there's only 8 games left in the season. They made their NHL debuts on Sunday. That would only put them at 9 games. Someone hop in the comment section down below and let me know if I'm right about that or 100% wrong. I'm absolutely not perfect. Next question comes from Darren Wilcox, 4683, who asked, Reichel is starting to get leapfrogged, unfortunately. Hasn't been done any favors being stuck on the fourth line. Can you see any trades happening with him involved this summer, or would you stick it out for his remaining season and see what happens? I agree, Darren. He hasn't been done any favors with the utilization of him, burying him down on the fourth line, never giving him opportunities with really any of the playmakers, never giving him true offensive-minded situations, never putting him on the power play. And before all of these kids stepped onto the scene, I really believe Lukas Reichel was one of the few guys on the power play. And if you've been watching this Blackhawks team all year, then you know entries have been a huge issue. And that's been an issue for a while. Lukas Reichel is one of the few players who can actually carry the puck into the offensive zone. Now, does he still make some bad decisions when he enters the puck with the offensive zone? Yes, but at least he's someone who can lug the mail through the neutral zone and help get the power play started. I agree. I don't believe Lukas Reichel has been done any favors. I don't think a trade for Reichel this summer would be the craziest thing in the world. I don't think it's something the Blackhawks are actively pursuing, but if someone gives them a trade intriguing enough, I think they will say yes to it because Reichel is not a Kyle Davidson draft pick. It's clear he has been leapfrogged. They're not giving him the lion's share of opportunities. There's now GM Katie guys here who we'd rather give those spots to. The one thing I have said about Reichel, though, is I don't believe the head coach of the Blackhawks the last couple of years, whether Sorensen or Richardson, last year, Lukas Reichel's utilization I thought was absolutely garbage. I would give him one more year under a new head coach. And again, he's under contract for that season. And it's another year where the Blackhawks aren't going to be contending for the Stanley Cup playoffs. So it's like a figure it out type of year again in my mind. I would give Lukas Reichel that opportunity. I think that's the more likely situation. But again, a trade, I wouldn't rule that out either. Crazier things have absolutely happened. Next question comes from Andy Alum 4357 on YouTube, who asked, would the Hawks actually win games if they actually bothered to shoot the darn puck? Yeah, there was a brutal sequence. I mean, it's been going on for years now, but real brutal 2-on-1 with Bedard and someone against Utah. And neither player wound up shooting the puck. It's like, Connor, you are the best goal scorer, the best shooter on this team. You got to be calling your own number on 2-on-1s, especially when they're giving you the opportunity to shoot the puck. Definitely think that mentality has not been embedded into these guys' brains enough over the last couple of years. And again, I think that comes back to coaching a little bit. The shoot first mentality just has not been there the last couple of seasons, and the Blackhawks definitely got to get back to playing more simplistic hockey out there. And I really hope the next head coach brings that type of mantra. It's been lacking them for far too long. Is that the reason why they're losing games? No, but I definitely don't think it helps, Andy. Andy also had a second question. Mailbag Monday. Pat Maroon, Mick Foley, Ryan Donato, Matthew Perry, Tyler Bertuzzi, Johnny Depp, Ilya Mikheyev, Young Groove from Despicable Me. You got any other Blackhawks looky-likeys? I tried to figure this out, and I'm really not good at this. For those of you who are on TikTok, I'm actually not on TikTok. I really only see Instagram Reels, but I know the Instagram Reel TikTok comparison is very similar. You're probably getting a lot of the same content. There is, I believe he's in New York or New Jersey. There is like this authentic Italian pizza guy who they always show videos of cutting up pizza and making fresh pies, and he's gone super viral. I think Alec Martinez kind of looks like that guy. I hope there are some people out there watching this or listening to this right now who know who I'm talking about. I don't have TikTok, so I don't know this guy's name, and I haven't paid enough attention when I've seen him on Instagram Reels to really know his name or like truly go and find him. But Alec Martinez looks like that type of dude, and I could see Alec Martinez owning his own pizza shop. The other one I got, Blackhawks fans, I hope you like this. I don't think he really looks like him, but they have the same hair. Sam Rinzel has Young Gravy's hair. And there's probably like 40, 50-year-olds or older listening to this that have no idea who Young Gravy is. I barely know who Young Gravy is. Go and give him a Google and then Google search Sam Rinzel. I swear they have the same like poofy, funny style of hair. Oliver Moore, quite honestly, kind of has it too a little bit. And it's actually eerie, both I don't think Oliver Moore and Sam Rinzel look very similar, but they have the same hair. They're both redheads a little bit. They both came from Minnesota. They both can fly. It's a little bit wonky, but I do think that Sam Rinzel has the hair of young gravy, and I hope that puts a smile on a couple of people's faces out there. Next question comes from Isaac Guerrero 8873. Isaac, always appreciate you for asking your questions basically on a weekly basis. This week, Isaac asked, question for Mailbag: to replace Murphy or get a top forward next season. ... Is there a 23 to 25-year-old RFA belonging to a cash strap / cap challenge team the Hawks may be able to trade for after the season? Well, the first part of that question, to replace Murphy or get a top forward next season. Murphy still has 1 year under contract, and I don't believe the Blackhawks are going to be trying to move him in the offseason. While they are ushering all of the kids in, you still need to have some veterans back there. And I believe Connor Murphy is the perfect guy. He's the longest tenured member of the Blackhawks. I think they're going to give him that respect, unless he comes to them and says, hey, I've never played playoff hockey in my life. This is the time now to trade me. I admittedly think that's going to happen at the next trade deadline regardless. Like, Murphy is probably going to get moved by the Blackhawks at the end of his deal. I don't see reason for them to bring him back at his age, even though he is the longest tenured member of the Blackhawks and has done so many great things for this organization. I just unfortunately think he's going to be one of those guys who, as tough as it is to say, isn't really going to see the fruits of his labor here in Chicago, because I just don't really picture him still being here when the Blackhawks open up that competitive window once again. But everything he's done for all of the guys throughout the years of rebuilding, that's really where his impact is going to come through. So I don't think the Blackhawks are going to be trying to trade Connor Murphy this offseason. I don't expect it to happen. So they definitely got to go after the top forwards in the free agent market, whether that be, whether you want to gear up and give a big run to Mitch Marner. I think it's going to be determined by what he does in the postseason. If I would go that route, you still got to go after Brock Besser, Nikolai Ehlers, Sam Bennett. If it's not Mitch Marner, you have to take two of the middle tier stash, I believe, in the free agent market. And now that's easier said than done, because a lot of these guys want to go play competitive hockey, and the Blackhawks obviously aren't there yet, but they do have the financials to kind of sweeten the deal a little bit. So I definitely think they got to go and add to this forward group, especially because the defense is the ones who are mostly having all of these prospects arrive to the stage right now. Connor Bedard and the forwards are the ones who are going to need more help moving forward. Next question comes from Chewy's Bro. Chewiest Bro. I don't know. No, I think it was Chewy's Bro. That might have just been a typo here on my sheet. Question of the week from West Oz. Why are the Hawks getting royally shafted by the refs? Non-calls on Bedsy, TT getting softer than a raw egg call versus the Knights that killed our momentum. KD, Coach Sorensen, Foligno need to call out the NHL. This is bloody ridiculous. Bloody ridiculous is a good way to put it, and getting absolutely shafted is a good way to put it as well. I don't know what's been going on this season, and I do feel like it's the refs in the NHL as a whole. I think they've been terrible this year, more so than any other year of hockey I've watched, but it has been against the Blackhawks, and in particular, Connor Bedard, more times than not. And I truly don't understand it, because I guess maybe I do understand it, because hockey's always been like, it's been one of those games where the old men don't like the new styles of the youngsters. And I think Connor Bedard being the face of the youngsters and the new era coming into this league, I think the old men want to see him go out there and prove it. And how many old men, retired NHL players in the media have we seen call out Connor Bedard this year, when the folks who are actually watching him and this Blackhawks team on a nightly basis know how absolutely ridiculous some of those criticisms are? It's coming from old guys who don't understand today's generation. And I feel like the refs have kind of carried over that mindset as well. Like, sorry, Connor, you don't get that call yet, bud. You got to prove to us you get that call. When that is just an absolute, pardon my language, horseshit mentality for an official to have. That kind of bias when going into an NHL game, I think, is completely unjustified, wrong, and has been clearly on display way too many times this year. And that's the only reason I could think of it, other than maybe the disdain for the Chicago Blackhawks and kind of the stains and the wrongdoings from the organization for the last decade and a half. That's the only thing that I can really think to. But it's been very, very apparent this year. The officials have not been on the side of Connor Bedard and the Blackhawks. And I really don't think the lack of response from the Blackhawks coaching staff and standing up for their players has done them any favors as well. Last question I got to answer here today comes from Luke Heinzman. I know this episode is running a little bit late here, but that's what happens when you get a beefy Mailbag Monday. Question for the mailbag. If the Hawks refuse to take Higgins, if they fall to 4, who would be your preferred other option? Thinking personally along the lines of Caleb Denser, Anton Frondell, Jake O'Brien, Victor Eklund, Rogers, McQueen. If the Hawks wind up at number 4 and James Higgins is there, they are taking James Higgins. This is a no-brainer. They are not going to refuse to take James Higgins at number 4. I'm sorry. For the sake of answering this question, I like Anton Frondell, but admittedly, I've really only dove into the top 4 prospects in this year's draft super heavy because of where the Blackhawks are at in the standings. But as the summer continues on, I'll get into the rest of the first round and high-end prospects as well. But if the Blackhawks are at 4 and James Higgins is still available, I promise you there is an 100% chance they're taking James Higgins. 100% chance, as it's a very clear-cut top 4 in this year's draft class. And even though it has been comparatively a disappointing freshman year for James Higgins, still was a point per game as a freshman. Yes, he is undersized, which is a little bit concerning, but he has great speed. He has great elusiveness. He can make two-way efforts. The Blackhawks, I believe, would be foolish to pass on him at number 4. But that's going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks, everyone. As always, thank you all again for joining me on the show. Be sure to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free wherever you may be listening to your podcast, and to subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. That way, you can check out the latest episode as soon as it becomes available each and every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Check me out on X at Jack Bushman2, and make sure to follow my strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. So until tomorrow's episode, everyone, have a great rest of your Mondays. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.